Welcome back to the 5th day of the Darla Sewalong. Today is only for the tie back views. So if you are sewing up one of the zip back views, you can skip today and actually tomorrow and just circle back for the last day of the sew along. Okay, and this first thing that we're going to do is actually just for the dress view of the tie back options. So if you're doing the jumpsuit, we have already sewn up the entire crotch curve. So the center back is already sewn up, but for the dress, we have not yet connected the two back pieces at center back. So with right sides touching, you are going to pin those together along that center back seam, sew it at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then finish those seam allowances in your preferred method and press those seam allowances either open or to one side. And it should look something like this. I'm actually showing you the jumpsuit view, but it should look the same along this center back edge right there at the top. And then now everything else that we're doing today is for both the jumpsuit and the dress view of the tie back version. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and grab our back elastic casing and we are going to fold it in half, wrong sides touching, and give it a good press. Okay, and then open that back up and then find the long unnotched edge of your back elastic casing and you're going to fold that wrong sides together up by 3/8 of an inch and give that a press. Okay, and then you're going to want to grab your back skirt or pant. Be extra careful making sure that it is the back. If you're sewing up the dress, the back is the one with the seam down the middle, but for the jumpsuit especially, it's hard to differentiate between the two. And then with right sides touching, you are going to pin the notched long edge of the casing, and that's the edge that we did not fold in, to the top of the back skirt or pant, matching the notches and the center back. Now, one other thing that you need to be extra careful with is the ends. Now, the ends of your casing should line up with the seam allowance of the side seam and not with the seam of the pocket. And then we're going to go over to our sewing machine and we are going to stitch at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then just to reduce a little bit of bulk inside of that elastic casing, I like to trim the seam allowance of the elastic casing down to about half of the normal seam allowance. Then you're going to take your iron and you are going to press the entire casing and the seam allowances up and away from the back skirt or pant. Okay, so you're going to flip your back skirt or pant over so it's wrong side facing up. And then we are going to take that casing and we're going to fold it essentially around to the back side. We are going to fold the casing up along that original fold line that we originally made. And then that 3/8 of an inch folded edge is going to cover that seam line just slightly. And we're doing this because after this, we're going to understitch on the other side and we want to be able to catch that right in that stitching. So pin it pretty generously because you really do have to make sure that it is just barely covering that stitch line. Okay, so now that that is pinned, we're gonna flip the back skirt or pant back over so it's right side facing up. And you are gonna sew through all layers by stitching in the ditch, which means that you're stitching in the seam line where the casing meets the back. And when you're doing that, you're gonna be catching the folded edge of the casing underneath. Okay, so it should look something like this. You can kind of see that stitching there on the back side, and then also you should be able to barely see it on the right side because it should just be hidden kind of in that ditch of the seam line. Okay, so go ahead and grab your 3/8 inch elastic. It should be cut to the recommended length on page 2 of the instructions, and then you are going to insert it into that casing that you just made. So you can use a safety pin for this. I actually like to use a loop turner. I find that that's probably a little bit easier, but just make sure that when you're doing this, that you leave a little bit on each side so that you can still grab it. You don't want it to slip in to your casing. But the other thing is that make sure that your elastic does not get twisted in the casing when you're doing it as well. Now, one thing to note here is that this really is just like a recommended elastic length. If anything, it's probably a little bit longer than you need. So just kind of keep that in mind that, you know, you might want to be able to shorten it later. So, you know, also different elastics also stretch a little bit differently. And then, like I said, make sure that you leave just like a little peak of the elastic on either side visible, and then you are going to pin on either side just to kind of secure the elastic inside the casing so it doesn't slip inside. And then you do want to just distribute the gathers evenly across that elastic. Okay, you can put your back skirt or jumpsuit kind of away for now, and we are going to be focusing on the front. So this is the front jumpsuit, so there's that seam there, but of course if you are doing the skirt or the dress version, there will not be a seam across the center front. We're going to sew 2 lines of gathering stitches along the upper edge of the front skirt or pant. We do the first one at 3/8 of an inch and the second one at 5/8 of an inch down from that raw edge. You're going to start and end your gathering stitches just inside of that pocket seam line. Make sure that you're not back stitching at both ends and that you are leaving long thread tails so that we can gather it easily. Okay, so it should look something like this. So now you are going to just, you know, hold on to those long thread tails and you're going to pull up those gathering stitches. And you want to pull them so that they are the approximate width of the bottom of your main bodice. I get to pretty close to the width that I want, I like to go ahead and press and steam my gathers in place. It just kind of sets the gathers a little bit and makes them a little less squirmy so that I can distribute the gathers evenly. And then with right sides touching, you are going to pin the bottom of the front bodice to the top of the front skirt or pant. Make sure that you're matching the center front notch to the center front notch of the skirt or the center seam of the pant, and then those remaining notches should line up with the bodice darts. The side edges of the bodice should extend 3/8 inch past the pocket seam line and line up with the seam allowance of the skirt or the pant. Once you have that all folded and you've distributed those gathers really nicely so that they're really evenly distributed, then we're going to go over to our sewing machine and we are going to stitch at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, and then if your fabric is kind of bulky, then you're going to want to grade those seam allowances to reduce the bulk. If nothing else, you might just want to do what I'm doing here, which is to trim down the gathered edge of the top of the skirt or the pant. I just kind of cut those seam allowances in half because I feel like most of the bulk does come from that gathered edge. And then you're going to press the front bodice and the seam allowances up and away from the skirt or pant. It's also a good time to go ahead and remove any visible basting stitches that are left over from gathering the skirt or the pant. Okay, the last thing that we're going to do today is we are going to attach the ties to the top of the front of the bodice. So you should have these 2 really long ties already all ready to go, and then you're going to find that notch at the top of the front bodice, and with right sides touching you are just going to pin so that the 2 raw ends line up, and then we'll go over to our sewing machine and we will just baste those in place, and that is where we're going to end today. So tomorrow we'll come back and we will get the bulk of the rest of the tie back views sewn up. We are going to attach the bodice lining and sew up the side seams, so we are getting there.